Welcome to Cyber Focus from the McCrary Institute, where we explore the people and ideas shaping and protecting our digital world. I'm your host, Frank Cilluffo. In today's episode, we sit down with Sean Lyngaas. Sean's CNN's top cybersecurity reporter, and he'll explain what it's like to cover the cyber beat, as well as provide some interesting information on one of the most underestimated threat actors out there in the cyber domain. You won't want to miss hearing from one of the best in the business. I'm delighted to host Sean Lyngaas with us today. Sean, as everyone who's listening and watching already knows, is CNN cybersecurity reporter. Sean covers all forms of hacking and hopefully the good guys' abilities to thwart some of those hacks. Has been around this issue for a number of years. Prior to CNN, he was at Cyberscoop, was a senior reporter there. But also, interestingly, had spent some time overseas and covering all sorts of geopolitical sorts of issues in the Ivory Coast for the New York Times, Washington Post, BBC, and I'm sure many others. I think everyone has their own paths, so you can't copy exactly how someone goes, but you've made it to CNN and you're doing some phenomenal work. So why don't we start with the beat itself and how you were interested in these issues and where you are today.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me, Frank, and to the McCrary Institute for hosting me. I appreciate the kind words. It's been a labor of love for a while now. I've been a reporter for about 11 years full time. It was a career shift at the time. I went to school for international relations for a master's degree in international relations. I thought I was going to be a diplomat. Came down to D.C., was applying for jobs and found it like a lot of people. You have to kind of wait in line in some cases. And in the meantime, at night, I was pitching news stories to editors because I've always had that desire to write about current events. Mm-hmm. And so I kind of slid into reporting that way. I got one article in the Atlantic and one article elsewhere, and then you start to brand yourself as a journalist all of a sudden. Some encouragement from my then girlfriend, now wife, to pursue it. It just seemed to be a fit for my personality and my values, my ideals of accountability, transparency, all those idealistic things that you try to hold on to. So at first I would write about whatever people wanted to hear about. I would write about the Syrian civil war. I started writing for the Washington Diplomat newspaper. It's you can find it. I think you can still find it in newsstands in D.C. area, little kiosk. You could pull open the newspaper. But interviewing ambassadors, you just you write for what the demand is, and over time the demand. For me, at least, I came across a lot of interest in cybersecurity. I was at a technology publication that focused on the smart grid technology in 2013, and my editor at the time decided to, it was me and him and a publisher. That was the entire publication.
And
every
the smart
day.
grid's gotten smarter since 2013.
Yes,
right?
Nothing's changed at all since then. But he said, why don't we do a series on the electric grid and how vulnerable it is or isn't to infiltration, be it cyber or physical. And I said, yeah, that sounds interesting to me. So we did a series on that. And then I kind of used that as a springboard to focus on the field because it was more interesting than other things I was writing about within that publication. Mm-hmm. Much as I like metering and other technology, it was it was important, but What kind of lit my interest was trying to tell stories about cybersecurity, how technology is used for ill or good, and how people are trying to get ahead of each other in this field. So I went from there to Federal Computer Week magazine, FCW, and focused full time on cybersecurity there. And really started to build up an interest and eventually sources. And then the OPM hack happened, way back in 2014.
For many of our listeners, yeah.
Yep. It seems like ancient history, but we still live with that. Like you said, I was in West Africa for a couple years, brief hiatus. Took a little bit of a break from cybersecurity, but not a complete break. I was freelancing and keeping myself. I think it's important as a reporter to try to be versatile in what you can write about. I love cybersecurity, but I got a chance to write about human rights in Ivory Coast, women's rights, LGBT rights or lack thereof, and really push myself as a reporter using French as a foreign language to do interviews, cutting across cultures and languages. And so that was a great experience. But I wanted to keep a foothold in cybersecurity because I wanted to come back to it. It was 2016, and the Russians had obviously done what they'd done vis-a-vis the U.S. Electoral system, influencing, trying to sow doubt. And that happened while I was in Africa, and I came back. While I was there, I also got a fellowship or a grant from the Pulitzer Center on Crisis Reporting. Really great organization. Yeah. They funded a lot of strong work, otherwise wouldn't be possible. In my case, I did a two-part series on cybersecurity challenges in the nuclear sector. You take cyber and nuclear; those two words, people lose their minds. So it was a challenge to ground that in sober reporting, but raise the possibility of what might happen if
while staying true to the science,
while trying to not scare people. It's a delicate balance. So I did a two-part series on that, one on the supply chain risks and one on cybersecurity drills that the sector was doing, UK, US officials. Really interesting. Mm-hmm. Also sparked in me an interest in a subtopic of cybersecurity, which is industrial control systems. I love writing about that to this day. The other day we did a story for CNN on the way that engineers at Cisco, working with the U.S. Air Force, Department of Energy, other people quietly smuggled in a piece of equipment to Ukraine that could withstand Russian electronic warfare attacks to keep the lights on. So that was fun.
Yeah.
So anyway, this it all comes back to seeing that there was a demand for cybersecurity in maybe 2013, 2014. There was starting to get growing interest, and not that there weren't reporters out there doing that. There's some great reporters that come before me and still continue to do amazing work. But now it's a more mature field. Sure. Over 10 years later, we've got it's a growth beat, which is not something you can say for a lot of news. Cybersecurity people. After Colonial Pipeline, I came to CNN, and that's those two things are probably related because of the interest in that the government has taken in trying to address this not only national security challenge. I see it often as a national security challenge, but also economic security and then human rights. People are starting to see it for what it is, which is our online secure, our encompassing everything we do. If it involves computers, that's what we're talking about. So the word cyber, we're stuck with it, and that's okay. But I like to talk about it I like to collaborate with as many of my colleagues at CNN as possible because there's a cyber aspect to everything they do as well.
Hey, Sean, you brought up a number of important, prevalent points here. And one I'd like to ask is how you can articulate and communicate issues where you have to be true to the science and know what is in the realm of the possible, but not speak in a beep and squeak language that only a handful of peers can relate to. And I think you've done a very good job of unpacking and dissecting complex issues and then being able to communicate them in ways that, quite honestly, our policymakers can understand as well as the broader audience. And I think our policymakers now are becoming more of the cyber age, but 20 years
Fair.
ago, that was certainly not the case. So I'd be curious what your thinking is there.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a good question. And I would agree that they're coming of age. Look around. Sometimes I'm following a lawmaker around Capitol Hill and I realize that I'm older than that person, which is not something that I could say for a long time. Yes, it's a challenge. There's actually, and we also, we as reporters, we try to be immersed in the community, if you will, the InfoSec community, the information security community. But there's also a strand of people who, within that community, who try to argue that we should never use the word hacker when we're talking about malicious activity, which frankly is just not feasible because we're trying to write in language that my family and my grandma can understand,
and everyone else.
Or just we're not going to talk about threat actors in a news story. I mean, unless we're quoting someone, and that's because hacker has a innate meaning to people, and in my book, it can be good or ill. Hackers are there's both hackers that are trying to fix the situation and hackers that are exploiting it. That's simple as that. But to your broader point about precise language, but also accessible language, I think that's the biggest one of the biggest challenges in this field. I struggle with it every day. You have to struggle to get to a place where you can somewhat satisfied with the wording. Obviously, you don't have a ton of time sometimes in the moment, but I think if we can be precise about how networks are accessed, whether we're talking about destructive activity or disruptive or espionage, and these things really matter. I try not to use the word attack unless I'm talking about something that does that does disruption or destruction. However, it's not always entirely up to me. I have editors, and we shape a story. The fact is that the average person understands the word cyber attack better than intrusion or that sort of thing.
I would use computer network attack or exploit. That's a foreign language.
Yeah,
to the average.
I mean, sometimes you might be able to get away with it, but for the most part, for me, a ransomware attack is an attack if you're encrypting computers and forcing people offline. Then again, cyber espionage of the SolarWinds type, not really a cyber attack, but I think we have to both assume a certain level of intelligence, not dumb it down too much, but also use words that can approximate what we're saying. We're not going to be perfect. It's just, was data stolen? Probably stolen instead of exfiltrated, we'll say. What I'm urging my colleagues in the PR industry who are responding to these incidents and working with lawyers to come up with statements in response to a cyber incident is not. I mean, inevitably there's going to be a certain amount of window dressing there where they're trying to, soften the blow of what happened, but we can't, we can't mince words if there is impact on patient safety in the case of the hospital, or other cases. We have to be clear and direct. We can't be wishy-washy about this. So it's something that I strive for every day. We approximate, and
I think you've gotten it right.
Yeah, well, thanks.
I really do. And another point that I mean, firstly, if you can exploit, if you can commit espionage, if the intent is there, in all likelihood, you can also attack. So there's also the bad guy has a vote in some of that.
Absolutely.
But the other issue that you raised that just resonates with me is how can you be a cyber reporter and not have the broader context? In other words, was it a Russia thing or a cyber thing? Is it a Taiwan, China thing or cyber thing? It's all of the above.
Yeah,
so cyber is a means to, it is its own domain with its own unique characteristics, but it's also a means to an end. And I'm just curious, that kind of makes it fun. It'll be a little different than some of the other beats.
Absolutely. I love whenever there's a geopolitical aspect to this. With, right now, talk about the Israel-Hamas war. Iranians, from as soon as, almost as soon as October 7th happened, I said to my editors or to myself. I think one way that the Iranians might get involved is without direct involvement. Obviously, we have these proxies in Syria and Iraq who are launching attacks, and that is, you can't separate that. That is a way of Iran interfering in a way or meddling in the conflict peripherally. But cyber became, in my mind, what I should focus on if the Iranians decide to rear their head. And sure enough, it's happened. I mean, at first there was kind of this wait and see period, and Microsoft researchers presented some findings recently saying that the Iranians, it wasn't as if on October 8th they were, all right, cyber operations go. They took a bit to spin up. So that's an interesting point. Were they caught a little bit off guard by the incident, by the terrorist attack on October 7th? I don't know. But yeah, it's actually it's absolutely a way for them to flex without flexing, really. And they've been extremely aggressive in promoting their through their sock puppets, through their personas, these hacktivists. The word is kind of almost lost meaning in a lot of ways because state actors are using these hacktivist personas and cutouts. They've contacted me, these people claiming to be the Cyber Avengers, and then some other outfit calling themselves Solomon's Army or something like that. Clearly thirsting for news coverage, which is part of the info op. But yeah, it's that aspect of it. But getting back to the broader point you made, I think you were kind of channeling Dmitry Alperovich in a way, saying, we don't have a cyber problem, we have a Russia, Iran, North Korea, China problem, etc. That's a good point in and of itself. And I also think you just can't disentangle these things and it's interesting to think about the ways in which the state operations, cyber operations, mirror how those governments not only see cyberspace but see the world and how they operate. The Russians, the destructive attacks from the GRU that have been attributed to the GRU, it's fitting with the GRU's worldview of
what they want,
chaos and intimidation and that kind of thing. And then the Iranians, what's always fascinated me, Frank, is the way that, fascinated but also disturbing, of course, the way that they use their cyber operations, particularly certain outfits, Charming Kitten, which I think has been traced to the IRGC. If you got one of those hacking teams going after you, it's your personal safety that's also potentially at risk.
No, that's very true. And one of the challenges with proxies today, it is difficult to discern who's the puppet, who's the master. No country worth its salt is going to send any of the muddy footprints back to their headquarters. Yeah. And in some cases, what you see coming out of China is very different than Russia. In Russia, as long as they're ready to support Mother Russia when they're called upon, basically they have free reign to operate their cyber criminal enterprises until that day. In China, you got military officers moonlighting in cybercrime, all of which is also very different than, say, Iran, where, there have been assassination attempts on individuals, and they're not new to cyber. I mean, there have been a number of cases, dams in the United States, energy infrastructure, and they've looked to Saudi Arabia, they've looked to Israel as their practice fields, and I used to always say that's a movie coming to a theater near you soon. And
well said.
And the reality is we do need to pay attention to what's going on globally. Just because we haven't seen it doesn't mean we won't see it, and others often have. And to me, that's just bringing in the expertise when covering cyber. You have to be a bit of a savant. You got to cover all sorts of issues, or at least work with others, and that actually keeps it fresh. It makes it fun.
Well, yeah. Just to interject quickly, I mean, you asked me how the writing approach, the verbiage, how we try to get it right. I'm lucky to have hundreds, if not more, thousands of people in my Rolodex that I can cross-check things with, and who are quiet. They don't show up in the article, but I'm like, am I explaining this right? What is the, how would you phrase the, like, not obviously they're not writing the article for you, but they're making sure that the language is technically accurate. Because I have to, I don't like using the phrase dumb it down, but I have to simplify it. And
if you want to connect and resonate, they've got to understand the context.
Absolutely.
And that's sort of, I mean, technology changes, human nature remains consistent until it is genuinely AI generated, machine generated. I think we do need to understand the intentions, the motives, intentions, capabilities, tactics, techniques, and procedures of human beings as well. But I want to pick on one actor that we didn't discuss yet. And it used to be that organized crime tries to penetrate the state. In North Korea's case, it's the inverse. It's the state trying to penetrate organized crime. In large part, I think, in very general terms, they've been cut out of the legitimate economy. And they used to turn to super bills to be able to fund some of their activities. And now, as the old Willie Sutton quote goes, which I understand may not be 100% accurate, but why rob banks? That's where the money is. Well, clearly they've turned to cyber, whether it's cryptocurrency, theft, mining, and the like, or other cyber crimes. You did a phenomenal piece of investigative reporting, and
Thank you.
And I don't mean to just puff you up on that, because normally with TV, you've got even less time than you did as a beat reporter to explain things. But pretty cool that you could put together not only a good story, but do so in a way that brought together some real investigative chops. You want to share some of that story?
Well, thanks for the kind words, and it helps that this topic, the topic being the North Korean use
a lot of mystery around it still.
It's ripe for storytelling, and there are, between the crypto guys who are being targeted, the North Koreans who are impersonating other Asian nationalities to try to get jobs at cryptocurrency firms, and then the classic cops that are trying to, I say classic, I mean investigative people. They are police in South Korea, the FBI, Secret Service, and then all the formers who are now working at cryptocurrency tracking companies that have really become prominent in the last several years, and that do good work to, that we as reporters that help us out a lot too. But all these characters that are ripe for storytelling. So I did a
sort of a Star Wars bar scene.
Yeah,
in some
Star
ways,
Wars,
right?
yeah.
All sorts of interesting.
Yeah, and it's the weirdest. I mean, North Korea never ceases to entertain, fascinate. Obviously, it's disturb is also a word I'd use, but they, their people underestimate them to this day. Just the savviness, they're learning the different protocols that are used in the crypto space, and I mean they're applying for these jobs as engineers. So I talked to one person who is anonymous, and one I did two investigative stories on this. One was on the focused on sort of the IT worker phenomenon, where North Korea, according to U.S. intelligence, South Korean intelligence, has tens of thousands of people overseas that are working as IT workers, much of the time impersonating others and saying and sending money back to Pyongyang that goes straight to the coffers and presumably towards the weapons programs. So there's that. I started with that, and I interviewed a guy that I found through some sleuthing. I found that he had been, he had a special experience. He was a cryptocurrency entrepreneur. He told me that one day he got a call from the FBI and said, "Sir, did you know you have a North Korean national on your payroll?" And he said, "No, I did not." And that was the first time he realized that for about 9 months or so, and the pay was good, especially by North Korean standards.
Yeah.
But this tens of thousands of dollars had been sent back to Pyongyang, according to the FBI, according to what this guy told me. And, he was slightly embarrassed by that, but it's not an isolated case. And so that was the hook to tell that story. And then we went into talking to some, current and former officials who have been trying to solve this problem. And, the U.S. government has been trying to get more proactive. The State Department, Treasury's been doing briefings where they're trying to warn people that better turn your Zoom camera on when you're doing an interview, job interview for a software developer who says that they're based in Canada and that speaks rocky English. One of the people I interviewed in the cryptocurrency space, he was on the record, was that he told me that he could hear a bunch of people in the background when he was trying to interview this guy, and they all were speaking not just with Korean accents, because this person had grown up around Korean speakers, but like this halting English that you might try to learn if you're in a pariah isolated state. So but it still gets people, and they're getting a little bit better at the tradecraft. So that was one aspect of exploring that, and I like that. But also there's the crypto theft that you mentioned, the actual hacking. And those two things are symbiotic, because they have IT workers, according to everyone I talk to, they have IT workers who are embedded in some of these crypto firms who might be able to poke around and know where the vulnerabilities are. And then you got the teams back in Pyongyang or China or even Russia who are doing the exploitation. So the second article focused on this heist. It was a South Korean intelligence, cybersecurity or blockchain analysis firm called Chainalysis, which does a lot of work in this space. And they were able to seize about 1 million. Well, they didn't seize it. The FBI seized it. But they were able to track and trace and claw back about 1 million out of, hundreds of millions that were stolen by Lazarus Group, although that term is very broad, but North Korean actors. And so it was a drop in the bucket. It was a small win, but it was like this cat and mouse game. And then once the North Koreans steal the money, how do they launder it and get it converted to hard cash? Because you can't buy nukes with crypto.
Yep.
So
as of now,
that
doesn't change.
Right.
Yeah.
No, I mean it's a long-term pursuit. The White House has now said publicly that they think a large chunk of the missile systems program that North Korea is funded by crypto theft. I can't remember what.
I think Ann Neuberger.
I can't remember what Ann Neuberger said a few months ago. It's in one of my stories, but it's 40% or something like that. Some large money.
Significant.
Yeah. So why would they stop? I mean, for a while, crypto was tanking in value, but that isn't necessarily the case now. And what else are they going to do to earn money? I mean, they certainly have other pursuits, but to your point about the inverse of criminal activity infiltrating the state, and this is the other way around. But they've been doing other forms of black market activity for decades. Fuel shipments, and this is something that I think I want to explore more, is how this pariah regime built up this army of
you and me both, and I think we're not alone in that. And it is a fascinating story, and I think there is some hubris that it's light years behind, and in some ways they are more than light years behind, but in other ways they're pretty forward-leaning. And it'd be curious to sort of see mainland China's role and all that, because I mean, all you have to look at is a map at night between South and North Korea. One's lit up, the other not so much activity there. That clearly they're using other areas as launch pads.
Yeah, you might recall, Frank, that not too long ago, within the last year or couple of years, the Justice Department indicted a couple Chinese nationals, accused them of laundering money for the North Koreans, but I think there's more to that.
And there's no honor necessarily among thieves, so you're starting to see what some may have stated in a geopolitical context, axis of evil of one sort or another, but you are seeing that legitimately in the criminal space, and therein lies the reason why we can't stop at water's edge. We have to work with our allies and even others to be able to get to countries where many of these folks are provided safe haven, whether Russia, China, and elsewhere. But want to jump quickly to what you think the big stories will be in 2024, and obviously not the headlines themselves, but thematically speaking, where do you see the priority of our time, agnostic to incidents or events? But
it's a good question. It's a tough one. I get all kinds of people pitching me on their predictions for 2024.
I say since the end of the Cold War, threat forecasting has made astrology look respectable. So
yes,
I try to punt that a little bit, but
it's difficult. But I mean, we know we're not done with ransomware. Obviously, I mean there's been a push to limit the payments that go out there.
What have you written on that? I did a dueling op-ed at one point on whether or not to pay ransom. I'd be curious.
I think some people in this space are convinced that without banning ransoms, the problem will not
continue
go
to
away.
Have ransomware.
That feasibility of that in practice is very difficult, I think. But I think
for government, maybe not so. For state and local government agencies,
right,
as well as
that's
federal.
a way. That's one place
way to ease into that.
Some people advocate for. I think we've seen this regulatory push from the Biden administration to try to get sectors to beef up their cybersecurity. There's been there's been some setbacks for that. The EPA rule got struck down. But others, I think we're going to see a more
SEC's kicking in December. It kicked in December.
Right. It's here, and at least as long as with this particular administration, we're going to see more attempts, I think, to regulate because they've been very clear that voluntary standards aren't getting the job done. So you're going to see more of that probably in 2024. Obviously, it's an election year here, with all the fun that entails in terms of threat actors. We got a glimpse of what might happen from a report. I think it was Microsoft a few months ago, generative AI, how alleged Chinese operatives were using that to try to, the practitioners warn against calling it the Russian playbook, but look, from a layman's perspective, it's with the post that you're looking at. Would not look that out of place from the Russian IRA in 2016, because it was social media posts that Microsoft attributed to Chinese actors that were kind of going after both political parties or trying to stir that anxiety if you're reading that post. Now, I don't think they did that well in terms of traction, but we're all in this space in terms of election security are bracing for what might happen, because we're already, as a country, there's so much distrust of the electoral process, division sown. Obviously, the former president has cast so much doubt, baseless doubt, not fact-based at all, doubt on the election system. So, as you know, as a national security person, that it doesn't take much for an intelligence service to try to exacerbate that. We're always in a position of not wanting, in the press, if you're trying to do your job, not amplify any of that. Stick to knocking down rumors and what is factual. But we're all going to have to be very vigilant. We also in the media to learn from how past elections are covered, in terms of not doing anyone's job, a foreign adversary or a domestic, a person who's spreading lies, not to do their job, absolutely to push back on that and to let the reporting speak for itself. So, election, what's going to happen with that? It's hard to tell. I think, 2020 was. It depends on how you see it, but okay, the Iranian, I wouldn't call it quiet, but I would call it quieter than what we expected, right? had the Iranian operation posing as the Proud Boys. That was bold and kind of took, I know, some people at the FBI and DHS a little bit by surprise, because like, well, this is a bit of an escalation. On the other hand, there wasn't a ton of other stuff. I mean, there was, I think that the Russian, there was a Russian intelligence outfit who were kind of poking around, but it wasn't really calculated. Now, the stakes are so high in terms of what happens with Ukraine policy in 2024. You know, the growing conviction among some people in the national security establishment that a conflict over Taiwan is on inevitable. So the stakes are extremely high, arguably as high as they've ever been. So in terms of reporting, we're going to be watching all of that.
You'll be busy.
Yes, we will. And also, 2020, we saw ransomware become an election security issue too, where we had Cyber Command take preemptive action. So I wouldn't rule that out either. I'm trying to think of what else, other than elections and.
Oh, that's a good. But you did bring up Taiwan, so I can't just sit back on my hands on this one. What do you think she is gleaning in terms of lessons learned in Ukraine? No surprise that immediately following Hamas's attack, you have this axis of strange bedfellows. Iran, Russia, China, and I'm not connecting those dots in any way, but what do you think? Regardless of what you and I think the lessons are from Ukraine, the real question is, what is she? What is he? What do you think he's gleaned, if anything?
Well, I'll start with the cyber aspect of it, which is obviously one I know best, but just the need for coordination. There's been a lot of discussion, as you know, Frank, about the efficacy of Russian cyber operations during the Ukraine war. I mean, one thing that came to mind, one line of thinking that I tend to subscribe to, is that they're just the same planning deficiencies that kind of hindered the actual Russian military forces, the lack of planning, even though they were building up troops around the border, the presumption that Kyiv would fall in a short time. That same lack of planning also, we saw that a little bit in their cyber operations. I mean, we had this wave of destructive attacks, which actually made sense because they thought they would destabilize the country and take Kyiv quickly. But now we're in this long game of kind of more just, there's still destructive attacks going on, but still pinpoint espionage.
And to support
tracking.
Very tactical, kinetic
Yes,
operations.
exactly. So I think she would, I don't know, but I would think that, my guess would be that he would have, if the plan is to invade Taiwan, that he would have, the cyber operations would be much more organized and strategic a little bit in terms of what they want to achieve on the battlefield, because we know, I mean, U.S. defense officials, they haven't gone on the record, but they've said this on background, and I know who they are, so it's credible information from what I've reported, is that what the Chinese have in Taiwan in terms of a foothold with their critical infrastructure, the electric grid. It seems to be pretty comprehensive. It's not like they burrowed into one entity.
Plus, if you think back to Ukraine, keep in mind their infrastructure was owned by the former Soviet Union and the Soviets, and they ripped and replaced. So they spent years. It's never going to be 100% secure. I don't think any of us could ever be 100% secure. But this was planning that was deliberate, and it took years to get to the point. And as someone who's worked on some of those issues with a number of the Ukrainians and others in the past, I honestly was one of those who didn't think, I was surprised at how well they handled themselves. And I'm hoping that there is a message that then the initiative will continue to remain with the attacker for the foreseeable future. But the defender has a chance here. Yes. If you put in the blood, sweat, and tears and the time and effort, they have a good fighting chance.
And also, if there's the fog of war, I mean, information operations are going to be carried out, I think, by all sides.
Yep.
The Ukrainians may not be entirely forthcoming with the impact that cyber attacks are having, because it's certainly not in their interest. They're defending their territory, and they're trying to. They're at war. So,
absolutely,
the ground truth about what's happening in terms of disruptive effects from cyber is very difficult to ascertain. And to your point, Taiwan obviously has a really advanced technology sector. I mean, cybersecurity people there, some top-notch talent. Obviously, that they're up against some formidable capabilities. And
China is not Russia either. They're pretty sophisticated in terms of their capabilities, and the reality is from an existential perspective, are probably the most significant competitor from a U.S. perspective. But you're right about that, and when you think about our dependence upon Taiwanese semiconductors and so-called chips and what have you, that could have a massive impact beyond, not to take away from loss of life and human death, but the economic implications would reverberate for decades. And I'm glad to see we're trying to shore some of that up. We can't do that on our own. We're going to have to work with our allies, but we've got a ways to go. Hey, Sean, you've spent so much time with me. I'd be curious, what questions did I not ask that I should have?
One thing that I think about a lot also is our, as reporters, the challenge we have in trying to cover U.S. cyber operations. It's delicate. It's hard. A lot of the companies that obviously provide threat intelligence on U.S. adversaries are either don't have the visibility into Iran or Russia, where the U.S. may be conducting cyber operations, or certainly are conducting certain. But also, there's the challenge of how companies see themselves in the national security ecosystem. Do they want to bite the hand that feeds it? And I'm not at all equating U.S. cyber operations.
Not a moral equivalency, no.
Right. I mean, there's certainly been very interesting cases that have come to light, and I just wish we had more data. I don't, I do agree with, I think David Sanger wrote in his book about the relative lack of transparency around about this. How do we understand? I mean, the U.S. government pushes for cyber norms all the time. That's all fair and well. We don't really have a good sense of how the U.S. has used cyber operations. And we know case studies like ISIS that have been sort of declassified and talked about by Cyber Command, and those are very interesting. But we should, as reporters, we should always strive to try to have a fuller picture. And again, not drawing a judgment on the equivalence here of anything. And the denials from the Iranian government and the Russian government and the Chinese government. They don't really get denials from the North Korean government because it's hard to contact them.
How do you find them? Yeah,
but they get the right of reply. But do I believe the weight of evidence? Yes, the evidence speaks. I mean, this is the beauty of the field, is that technical evidence can say a lot.
Yep.
It's not, if so many people are coming forward with credible indicators of compromise of activity that ties back to a certain country, then I mean the evidence speaks for itself, and so.
Attribution has improved exponentially.
Absolutely. It makes our jobs
Smoking
easier, too.
Keyboards are actually findable.
Yeah, we don't have to be so weaselly or mealy-mouthed about who did what.
Yep.
That makes it more relatable. But we do need some understanding, a better public understanding of how the U.S. has used cyber operations. I think that's fair. It's very difficult to get at.
I'm not going to make your job easier on that one, other than to say The reality is we're never going to firewall and defend our way out of this problem. I don't think any form of conflict will not have a cyber dimension to it. I think the differentiator is how it's used and under what circumstances and rules of engagement and armed conflict but that's worthy of a very lengthy discussion, which hopefully we'll have you back when you write that story.
Would be my pleasure to be back.
Sean, thanks for your reporting. Thanks for joining us today. Thanks for making us all a little smarter, and keep doing good things. So,
thanks for having me, Frank.
No offense to Duke, but War Eagle, and I'll speak to you soon. Thank you, Sean.
Thank you.